They say the people closest to you hold the sharpest knives. I learned that truth the hard way, standing in a mansion that cost more than most people see in 10 lifetimes, watching the man I'd trusted aim a weapon at the husband I never meant to love. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story doesn't start with betrayal. It starts with desperation, with impossible choices, and with a transaction that should have been simple. Should have been. Welcome to Tea and Payback, where the tea is hot, the secrets are messy, and karma always finds her way home. Before I go on, just a quick reminder. I share new life stories every day. If you enjoy them, subscribing and liking the video would mean a lot to me. Now sit down, pour yourself a cup of tea, let's continue. My name is Victoria Cross. I'm 23 years old, and 3 months ago I sold myself to save my mother's life. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days when everything fell apart. I stood at the window of our cramped apartment in Denver, Colorado, watching water streak down the glass like the tears I'd run out of weeks ago. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago. The walls were thin enough that I could hear our neighbors arguing. The ceiling had water stains that looked like continents on a broken map, and the heating worked only when it felt like it. But it was home. It was all we had. Behind me, in the bedroom that smelled of medication and decay, my mother was dying. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave her 6 months without treatment, maybe a year with it. Treatment we couldn't afford. Treatment that cost more than my father made in 5 years working at the warehouse. Treatment that the insurance company had denied 3 times with increasingly creative excuses. Victoria? Her voice was so weak now, barely a whisper that cut through me like broken glass. I forced a smile onto my face before turning around. That smile had become my armor over the past 6 months. The mask I wore so she wouldn't see how terrified I was. So she wouldn't see that I lay awake every night calculating bills we couldn't pay and time we didn't have. I'm here, Mom. Do you need anything? Water. Your medication. She tried to smile back, but pain twisted it into something else entirely, something that made my chest ache. Where's your father? He said he'd be back by lunch. My stomach dropped through the floor. I knew exactly where he was. Meeting with the men he should never have borrowed from. The kind of men who didn't accept excuses or offer extensions or care about sob stories. The kind of men who broke fingers first and asked questions later. 3 months ago, when the hospital bills started piling up like accusatory letters and the bank rejected our loan application for the 3rd time, Dad had made a choice. A stupid, desperate, utterly understandable choice. He'd gone to a loan shark named Vincent Blackwood, borrowed $30,000 for Mom's first round of treatment, and promised to pay it back within 90 days. Today was day 91. He'll be back soon. I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He probably just got held up at work. Mom nodded, but I could see she didn't believe me. She'd been married to him for 26 years. She knew when something was wrong, but she was too tired to push, too worn down by pain and medication to do anything but close her eyes and drift back into that half-sleep that was all she had anymore. I went back to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass, watching the rain turn the street below into a river. People hurried past with umbrellas, normal people with normal problems, people who weren't watching their mothers die by inches, people who hadn't sold their textbooks to buy groceries, people who still had futures. The apartment door didn't open. It exploded inward with a crash that made us both jump, made me spin around with my heart in my throat. My father stumbled through, his face the color of old newspaper, his hands shaking so violently he could barely close the door behind him. Blood trickled from his nose, dark and bright against his pale skin. His left eye was already swelling shut, purple spreading across his cheekbone like spilled ink. Dad! I rushed to him, but he held up a hand to stop me, palm out like a traffic cop. Don't. His voice cracked, splintered into pieces. Don't come closer. Not yet. I need to tell you something first. My mother tried to sit up in bed, panic overriding pain, her skeletal hands clutching the blanket. Thomas, what happened? What did they do to you? He sank into the chair by the door, the one with the broken spring that nobody liked sitting in, and buried his face in his hands. For a horrible moment, I thought he was crying, thought I was about to see my father break completely. Then he spoke, and I realized something far worse was happening. He was giving up. "We have 1 week," he said to the floor, to his trembling hands, to the universe that had decided to crush us. 7 days to pay back everything. 30,000 plus interest. 42,000 total. The number hit like a physical blow, like someone had punched me in the stomach and knocked all the air from my lungs. We didn't have $400, let alone 42,000. We were living on ramen and prayer, one emergency away from homelessness. And if we don't, they take the apartment. He finally looked up at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't just fear. It was something darker, something that looked like resignation and shame and a terrible knowledge. And they said if we don't pay, they'll make sure your mother doesn't live to see another month. They said they'd make it look like the cancer, like natural causes, but they'd make sure. Mom gasped, a sound like something dying. I felt the room tilt, felt gravity become unreliable. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But it was, and the worst part was knowing that men like Vincent Blackwood didn't make empty threats. But there's an option. Dad's voice dropped to barely a whisper, and I knew. I already knew what was coming before he said the words. Vincent Blackwood has a business partner. Older man, very wealthy, very powerful. His name is Julian Mercer. He's 58 years old, owns half the real estate in 3 states. He saw you once, a few weeks ago when they came here to collect the first payment. He's willing to forgive the entire debt, pay for your mother's treatment, set us up for life, give us enough money that we'd never have to worry again. He paused, and the silence stretched like torture. If you agree to marry him. The words hung in the air like poison gas, like something toxic that would kill us all if we breathed it in. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The only sound was the rain against the window and the ticking of the cheap clock on the wall, counting down seconds we didn't have. Then reality crashed back in, and with it came rage, hot and clean and useless. "Are you out of your mind?" I heard myself shouting, heard my voice crack and break. "You want me to marry some old man I've never met? To sell myself like property? Like some medieval bride being bartered for land? Victoria, please just listen." No, Dad, this is insane. This is human trafficking. This is. I stopped because Mom was crying, silent tears streaming down her hollow cheeks, and I realized something that made my fury collapse into ash and dust. They were desperate enough to actually consider this. We all were. Because what choice did we have? Let Mom die? Let them kill her? Lose everything and end up on the streets? I sat down heavily on the arm of the couch, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. "Tell me about him," I said quietly, hating myself already. "This Julian Mercer. Tell me everything." My father's shoulders sagged with something like relief mixed with shame and grief. Julian Mercer. He's almost 60, made his fortune in real estate and investments back in the 80s. Built an empire from nothing. But he had a stroke 2 years ago, massive one. The left side of his body is mostly paralyzed. He walks with a cane and needs help with almost everything. The doctors say he has maybe a year left, 2 at most. His organs are failing, his heart's weak. He's dying, Victoria. Slowly, but definitely. So I'd be what? A nurse? A caretaker? Someone to change his bedpan and pretend to care. A wife. A legal wife. Dad's voice was hollow. And when he passes, you'd inherit his entire estate. Vincent said it's worth millions. Tens of millions. You'd never have to worry about money again. None of us would. I looked at my mother, whose illness had carved her face into a skull, whose body was eating itself from the inside. I looked at my father, beaten and broken by men who'd crush us without a second thought, who'd already proven they had no limits to their cruelty. And I looked at my own hands, young and empty and powerless, and thought about the future I'd planned. Community college. Maybe a degree in literature. A simple life with simple joys. All of it evaporating like water in the desert. I need to meet him first, I heard myself say, and the words came from somewhere outside myself. Before I decide anything, I meet him face to face. I see where he lives. I understand exactly what he's expecting. And then I'll decide. Dad nodded quickly, desperately. Yes, of course. I'll tell them. I'll arrange it. They said they'd give us a few days to think about it. Arrange it for tomorrow, I said. If we only have a week, we don't have time to waste. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows move across the water stains, thinking about how fast a life could unravel. Just 6 months ago, I'd been a normal girl with normal dreams. Working at Northside Books, the used bookstore downtown where I spent more time reading than actually helping customers. Saving up for community college. Dating Marcus Chun, the guy from my art class who made me laugh and didn't mind that I was broke. Simple things. Good things. Real things. Now I was contemplating marrying a dying stranger to save my family. Now I was measuring my worth in dollars and debt. Now I was about to step into a life that sounded like something from a Victorian novel. The kind where the heroine always ended up either rescued or ruined. I wondered which one I'd be. The meeting was arranged for 2 days later. The day felt impossibly long. I went to work at the bookstore, shelved books with mechanical precision, smiled at customers without seeing their faces. My boss, Mr. Patterson, asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was fine. He didn't believe me but didn't push. That was the kind of man he was, kind enough to notice but respectful enough not to pry. At 1:30, I told him I had a doctor's appointment and left early. Another lie. I was becoming good at lying. A black Mercedes arrived at exactly 2 p.m., sleek and expensive and completely out of place on our shabby street. A few neighbors stopped to stare. Mrs. Chun from 3B actually came to her window to watch. The car probably cost more than everyone on our block made in a year combined. The driver was a man in his early 40s, tall and well-built, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. His face was handsome in a cold way, all sharp angles and calculating eyes. He assessed me as I approached, and I felt like livestock being examined for purchase. The feeling made my skin crawl. Miss Cross, I'm Gregory Stone, Mr. Mercer's personal assistant. I'll be taking you to the estate. His voice was smooth, professional, completely devoid of warmth. He opened the back door for me, and I slid into leather seats that probably cost more than our monthly rent. The interior smelled like expensive cologne and money. Before we pulled away, Gregory handed me an envelope. Mr. Mercer asked me to give you this. Inside was a photograph of a mansion that looked like something from a movie, all white columns and manicured gardens and windows that reflected the sky. It looked like a palace. It looked like a prison. And there was a note in elegant handwriting, the kind they don't teach anymore. This will be your home. I promise you will want for nothing. I stared at the photo as we drove, trying to imagine myself living there, and couldn't. It was too big, too grand, too far from anything I knew. Mr. Mercer is a man of his word, Gregory said, watching me in the rearview mirror. He understands this situation is unusual, but he's prepared to provide for you and your entire family. Your mother will receive the best medical care available. We're talking about specialists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, anywhere in the world. Cost is no object. And your father's debt will be completely erased, not just forgiven but destroyed. The record wiped clean. And what does he get? I asked, still staring at the photograph, at this palace I was supposed to call home. What does he really want from me? Because men don't do this out of kindness. Gregory's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mr. Mercer is dying, Miss Cross. He's 58 years old and he's alone. No family, no children. No one who gives a damn whether he lives or dies. He spent his entire life building an empire, accumulating wealth and power and property. And now he's facing the end with no one beside him. He wants companionship. Someone to talk to. Someone to care whether he wakes up tomorrow or doesn't. He paused, and for just a moment something like sympathy flickered across his face. Is that really so terrible? Is wanting not to die alone such a monstrous thing? I didn't answer because I didn't know. Was it terrible to buy someone's company? Or was it more terrible to let your mother die when you could save her? What was worse, selling yourself or letting someone you love suffer? The questions had no good answers. The drive took about an hour. We left the city behind, the cramped buildings and graffiti-covered walls giving way to sprawling countryside. Fields stretched in every direction, dotted with expensive houses that got bigger and farther apart the deeper we went. This was a different world, one where people had driveways longer than my street, where poverty was something you read about in charity appeals. Finally, we turned onto a private road marked only by a discreet sign that said Mercer Estate. The car passed through iron gates that must have cost more than our apartment building, gates with intricate metalwork that looked like something from a European castle. Beyond them, the grounds opened up into what could only be called a park. Perfectly manicured lawns rolled like green carpets. Fountains threw crystal arcs of water into the air. Old oak trees lined the driveway, their branches meeting overhead to form a tunnel of leaves. And at the end of it all, sitting on top of a gentle hill like a crown, was the mansion. 3 stories of pristine white stone with more windows than I could count. Columns supported a massive portico. Balconies jutted from the upper floors. Wings extended to either side of the main building, suggesting rooms beyond counting. It looked like something presidents lived in. It looked like something queens would envy. It looked absolutely terrifying. Gregory parked at the base of wide marble steps and came around to open my door. "Welcome to your new home, Miss Cross. Assuming you agree, of course." I climbed out on shaking legs and stood staring up at the building. A building? No, this was a monument to wealth, a physical manifestation of more money than I could comprehend. And somewhere inside was a dying man who wanted to buy himself a companion for his final year. "This way, please." Gregory led me inside, through double doors that were twice my height, into a foyer that made me stop and stare. The floor was white marble veined with gold. A chandelier hung from a ceiling 3 stories up, throwing rainbows across the walls through what must have been 1,000 crystals. A curved staircase swept upward like something from a fairy tale. Paintings in gilt frames lined the walls, real paintings by artists whose names I probably should have known. "Follow me, please. Mr. Mercer is waiting for you in the study." We walked down a hallway that seemed to stretch forever, passing room after room glimpsed through open doorways. A library with books from floor to ceiling. A sitting room with furniture that looked like museum pieces. Something that might have been a ballroom with a floor so polished it reflected like a mirror. I lost count of the rooms, lost track of the turns we took. Finally, Gregory stopped at a set of double doors carved from dark wood with scenes that might have been biblical or mythological. I couldn't tell. He knocked twice, then opened the door without waiting for an answer. "Mr. Mercer, your guest has arrived." The room beyond was enormous, but it felt intimate somehow. 3 walls lined with books from floor to ceiling, thousands of them, more books than the store where I worked. A fireplace big enough to stand in, currently cold. Persian rugs covering the hardwood floors. And near the tall windows that overlooked the garden, with his back to me, a man in a wheelchair. "Come in," a deep voice said, rough like gravel but with an undertone of something else. "Education, maybe. Refinement. I won't bite, Miss Cross." Despite what you might have heard. Gregory withdrew, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded to my terrified ears like a cell locking. I stood there frozen, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it from across the room. This was it. This was the moment where I'd see the man who wanted to buy me, who thought a fortune could replace actual human connection. "Come closer," the man said, still not turning. "Let me see you. Let me see if Vincent's description matched reality." My legs felt like lead as I walked around the wheelchair, each step an act of will. I'd prepared myself for something monstrous, for a decrepit old man, for someone who looked like death. What I wasn't prepared for was what I actually saw. Julian Mercer sat with a wool blanket across his lap despite the room being warm. His body was thin but not wasted, his shoulders still broad under his expensive sweater. But what stopped my breath, what made me stare despite knowing it was rude, was his face. Or rather, what covered it. He wore a black leather mask that concealed the entire left side of his face, leaving only his right eye, his nose, and the right side of his mouth visible. It wasn't a Halloween mask or something theatrical. It was custom-made, expensive, designed to look almost like skin. Almost. Silver hair swept back from his forehead, perfectly styled. His visible eye was a pale, piercing blue that studied me with an intensity that made me want to look away. "Apologies for the mask," he said, and there was dark humor in his voice, a wry self-awareness. The stroke didn't just paralyze my body. It twisted my face. The left side droops, the eyelid won't close properly, the mouth hangs slack. Saliva drips. It disturbs people, makes them uncomfortable. This is easier for everyone. I found my voice, though it came out quieter than I'd intended. Mr. Mercer, Julian, if we're going to be married, you should use my first name. Mr. Mercer was my father, and he was an unpleasant man. I'd rather not be associated with him. Julian. The name felt strange on my tongue, too intimate for a stranger. I need to understand something. Why me? With your money, with your resources, you could hire nurses, companions, entire staffs of people. You could buy whatever company you needed. Why force a marriage? Why drag my family into this? He was quiet for a long moment, his visible eye studying me with that same intense focus. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. Have you ever been truly alone, Miss Cross? Not just physically alone, but utterly isolated? Surrounded by people who only see you as a function, a source of money or power or influence. People who smile to your face while calculating what they can extract from you. I've been broke, if that counts. People stop seeing you pretty quick when you can't afford to matter. That almost made him smile. A fair point, but consider this. Everyone I've ever known wanted something from me. My ex-wife wanted the lifestyle my money provided. My business partners wanted access to my wealth and connections. My employees want their paychecks. My brother wants my inheritance. Even Gregory, loyal Gregory who's been with me 20 years, stays because I pay him extraordinarily well. Not a single person who's with me just to be with me. Just because they give a damn whether I live or die. He paused, and something vulnerable crossed his visible features. You, Miss Cross, aren't here because you want my fortune for yourself. You're here for your family, for your mother. That tells me you have principles. That tells me you're capable of loyalty, of sacrifice. That tells me you won't pretend affection you don't feel just to manipulate me into giving you more than we agreed upon. You think I won't manipulate you? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice, couldn't keep the anger at this whole situation from bleeding through. You just said yourself that I'm here for my family, that I'm making this bargain to save them. That's exactly what I'm doing. That's manipulation wrapped up in pretty words. Yes, but you're honest about it. He shifted in the chair, and I saw pain flash across his visible features. Honesty is the only thing I haven't been able to buy, Miss Cross. Until now, perhaps. I'd rather have your honest transactional presence than someone's false affection. At least I'll know where I stand. The logic was twisted, but I understood it. I understood the loneliness that would drive someone to this. What exactly do you want from me? What would this marriage actually look like? Because I need to know what I'm agreeing to before I agree to anything. Julian Mercer reached for the cane resting against his chair and, with visible effort, pulled himself to his feet. His left leg dragged as he moved toward the window, each step an ordeal. He was tall, I realized, or had been before the stroke bent him. Breakfast together. Dinner. Conversation. Read to me sometimes because my vision isn't what it used to be, and the words blur after an hour. Sit with me in the evening. Watch old movies. Listen to music. Create the illusion that I have a family, that I'm not dying alone in this mausoleum I built. He stood at the window, silhouetted against the light, and for a moment he looked less like a man and more like a shadow. That's all I want, Miss Cross. Your presence. Your company. Your time. No other expectations. You'll have your own suite of rooms on the 3rd floor, as far from mine as you can get. Your own life, your own privacy. Just be here. Just make me feel a little less like a ghost. I watched him stand there, this broken man in his fortress of wealth, and felt something unexpected. Pity. Raw, aching pity that made my throat tight. He was dying and he was alone and he'd reduced himself to buying companionship because he had no other option. Or thought he didn't. And if I refuse? I ask softly. If I stand up right now and walk out that door and never come back, then the money already advanced for your mother's first treatment will need to be returned to Vincent Blackwood immediately. Your father's debt remains unpaid and due within 5 days. And I won't stop you. I won't hold anyone against their will, Miss Cross. That would defeat the entire purpose. He turned to face me fully, leaning heavily on the cane. The choice is always yours. I may be buying your time, but I can't buy your willingness. That has to be freely given, or it's worthless. I thought about Mom's hollow face, about the way her hands shook when she tried to hold a cup of water, about the fear in her eyes when she looked at Dad, about my father's beaten, bloody face and the knowledge that men like Vincent Blackwood didn't make empty threats. And I thought about this lonely, dying man who had everything except the one thing he wanted most: company. The simple presence of another human being who'd acknowledge his existence. When would the wedding be? I asked, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff. Something changed in his expression. His visible eye widened slightly. Relief, maybe. Or resignation. Or perhaps just surprise that I was actually considering it. 1 week from today. Small ceremony, just paperwork really. A county clerk, a witness. No fuss unless you want something more elaborate. I assumed you wouldn't want a celebration. You assumed right. I don't want anything that looks like a real wedding. No white dress, no flowers, no pretending this is something it's not. Agreed. But I have conditions. I stood up, suddenly needing to be on my feet, needing to feel like I had some power in this negotiation. My mother's treatment starts immediately. Today, if possible. I want the best doctors you can find. I want you to do whatever it takes to save her life. Done. My father's debt is erased completely. Not just paid, but destroyed. I want the record wiped clean, every trace of it gone. Consider it done before you leave today. And I want to be able to visit my family whenever I want, as often as I want. And when Mom's stronger, when she's recovered enough, I want her to be able to visit here, to see where I'm living. I don't want to be cut off from them. This will be your home, Victoria. Your home. You can have anyone you wish here. Your family, your friends, whoever matters to you. I'm not trying to isolate you. I'm just trying not to be alone myself. I looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see past the mask and the money and the desperation to who he actually was. And what I saw was a man who'd lost everything that mattered and was trying to buy back something, anything, to fill the void before he died. Then I agree, I said, and the words hung in the air like smoke. I'll marry you. Julian Mercer nodded slowly, and I thought I saw his visible eye glisten with moisture. Thank you, Victoria. You have no idea how much this means. I know exactly how much it means, I said quietly. $42,000 plus medical bills. That's my worth. That's my price. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. That's not. It is. Let's not pretend otherwise. You're buying my time and I'm selling it. Let's at least be honest about that much. For a long moment we stood there, buyer and seller, two desperate people making a bargain that would change both our lives in ways neither of us could predict. Finally, Julian spoke. Gregory will show you the rooms on the 3rd floor. Choose whichever you like. Your belongings will be moved tomorrow. And Victoria, he turned back to the window. Welcome to your new life. I hope you won't grow to hate me for it. I left without answering because I didn't know what to say. Because part of me already hated him for reducing me to a transaction, and part of me pitted him for being so lonely that buying companionship seemed like his only option. And part of me, the honest part one didn't want to acknowledge, was relieved. Relieved that Mom would be saved. Relieved that we wouldn't be crushed by debt. Relieved that I wouldn't have to watch her die. Gregory appeared immediately, as if he'd been listening at the door the whole time, which he probably had been. Miss Cross, I understand congratulations are in order. Don't, I said sharply. Don't congratulate me on selling myself. Just show me the rooms. Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify. Then the professional mask slammed back into place. Of course. This way, please. He led me through the mansion, and with each room we passed my sense of unreality grew. This wasn't a house. This was a museum, a palace, a monument to wealth I couldn't even conceptualize. Guest suites bigger than my family's entire apartment. A sitting room with furniture that looked like it belonged behind velvet ropes. A library with a rolling ladder and thousands of books. A music room with a grand piano. An actual ballroom with a floor so polished I could see my reflection. Mr. Mercer enjoys entertaining, Gregory said, noticing my stare. Or he did before the stroke. Now these rooms mostly sit empty. The bedrooms were on the 3rd floor, accessed by a grand staircase that curved upward like something from a movie. The hallway at the top was wide enough to drive a car through, lined with doors that led to various suites. "You may choose any room you like," Gregory said, gesturing at the options. Each suite includes a bedroom, sitting room, private bathroom, and dressing room. The furnishings can be changed if they're not to your taste. I walked down the hall, opening doors, feeling more disconnected from reality with each step. Every room was gorgeous. Every room was bigger and more luxurious than anything I'd ever seen. And every room felt like a beautiful prison cell. I stopped at a corner room at the end of the hall. It had windows on 2 walls, one overlooking the gardens and one facing the distant woods. The furniture was substantial, but not ostentatious. A 4-poster bed, a writing desk, comfortable chairs arranged around a fireplace. It was beautiful in an impersonal way, like a luxury hotel. "This one," I said, because I had to choose something. Gregory nodded approvingly. "An excellent choice. Someone used to live in this room years ago. It hasn't been occupied since." He stopped abruptly, as if catching himself before saying too much. "Never mind. I'll arrange for your personal belongings to be brought here tomorrow. And now, if you're ready, I'll drive you home. You'll need to gather your things and say goodbye to your family." "Goodbye." The word hit hard. "I can visit them whenever I want." Julian said so. "Of course." I misspoke. "Goodbye to your old life," I meant. "Tomorrow you'll be living here. In 1 week you'll be Mrs. Mercer. Your life as Miss Cross is over." The words echoed in my head all the way back to Denver, all through that silent drive in the back of the Mercedes. My life as Miss Cross is over. I'd agreed to this. I'd made this choice. But sitting there in expensive leather seats, watching the world pass by through tinted windows, it didn't feel like a choice. It felt like a trap closing. Dad and Mom were waiting when I got home. I told them I'd agreed. Mom cried. Dad tried to thank me and couldn't get the words out. I went to my room and lay on my narrow bed in the apartment I'd lived in my whole life, and I couldn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. Just a cold, empty feeling like something inside me had broken. The next day, a moving company arrived to pack my things. It took them 20 minutes. I didn't have much. Clothes that suddenly looked shabby. Books I'd read 100 times. A few photographs. My whole life fit in 3 boxes. A delivery arrived that afternoon. Boxes and boxes of new clothes, expensive brands I'd only seen in magazine ads. Dresses and skirts and shoes and jewelry. Everything in my size, everything coordinated, everything screaming money. There was a note from Julian. "A wife should look the part. If anything doesn't fit or isn't to your taste, Gregory will exchange it." I looked at the beautiful clothes and felt sick. Every piece was a reminder of the price I'd paid. Every dress was evidence of my transaction. That night I said goodbye to Marcus. He'd been calling all day, worried because I hadn't shown up for our planned coffee date. I met him at the park near my apartment, the place where we'd first kissed 3 months ago. "Where have you been?" he asked, pulling me into a hug. "I was starting to think you were avoiding me." I stepped back, putting distance between us. "Marcus, I need to tell you something, and you're going to hate me for it." "I could never hate you, Vic." "What's wrong? Is it your mom? Did something happen?" "I'm getting married." He laughed, thinking it was a joke. Then he saw my face. "You're serious?" "Next week. To someone I just met. It's complicated." "Complicated?" "Victoria, we've been dating for 4 months. You said you loved me. How is this complicated?" "Who is he?" "Someone who can help my family. Someone who can save my mom's life. That's all you need to know." Marcus's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, hurt, understanding, anger. "You're selling yourself. For money. For your mom." "Yes. And what about us? What about what we had?" "What we had was nice, Marcus. But it was never going to be enough to save my mom. You work part-time at a coffee shop. You're a sweet guy, but you can't do anything to help. This man can. So I'm making a choice. A choice to throw your life away." His voice rose, drawing looks from other people in the park. "To marry some rich old man you don't even know. This is insane, Victoria. You can't do this." "I already did. I signed papers today. It's done." I walked away while he was still shouting, Walked away from the hurt in his eyes and the future we might have had. Walked away from being a normal girl with normal problems. When I got home, I blocked his number. It was kinder than letting him keep calling. The following days blurred together. I moved into the mansion, into that beautiful corner room that felt like a luxury prison. The staff was introduced. Martha, the housekeeper, a stern woman in her 50s who ran the household with military efficiency. The cook, 2 maids, a groundskeeper. All of them professional, all of them polite, all of them clearly wondering what the hell their employer was thinking bringing home a girl young enough to be his granddaughter. I saw Julian twice in those first 3 days. Once at breakfast, where we sat at opposite ends of a table meant for 12 and made awkward small talk about the weather. Once at dinner, equally painful. He was polite, distant, clearly giving me space. But I could feel his eyes on me sometimes, watching, calculating, probably wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. I spent most of my time alone, wandering the mansion like a ghost haunting a place she didn't belong. I explored the library, running my fingers along spines of books I'd only read about. First editions, signed copies, books worth more than cars. I walked the gardens, following stone paths through perfectly manicured hedges and flowers I couldn't name. I sat in my room and stared out the window at a world that felt increasingly unreal. The wedding happened exactly 1 week later, just as Julian had promised. No fanfare, no celebration, no pretense that this was anything but a business transaction being made legal. A black car picked me up at 9 a.m. I wore a simple white dress, one of the new additions to my wardrobe, because even though I'd said I didn't want to look like a bride, some part of me couldn't wear anything else. The dress was elegant but understated, nothing like the wedding gown I'd imagined wearing someday when I got married for real. When I got married for love. Julian was already at the courthouse when I arrived. He wore a formal black suit that probably cost more than my family's rent for a year, leaning heavily on his cane. The mask still concealed half his face. I wondered if he ever took it off, or if he'd become so accustomed to hiding that it had become part of him. Gregory was there as our witness, along with an elderly woman I'd never seen before who turned out to be a notary. That was it. For people in a sterile government office, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of old paper and bureaucracy. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. The clerk, a bored-looking man in his 40s who'd probably done this 1,000 times, read through the legal requirements in a monotone that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Do you, Julian Alexander Mercer, take this woman? Do you, Victoria Rose Cross, take this man? I do. I do. Sign here. And here. Congratulations, you're married. When the clerk pronounced us husband and wife, Julian didn't try to kiss me. He simply took my hand, his palm surprisingly warm and dry despite the air conditioning. He leaned close and whispered, "Thank you, Victoria. I know what this cost you." I didn't answer because there was a lump in my throat the size of a fist, and I was terrified that if I tried to speak I'd start crying and never stop. Gregory drove us back to the estate in silence. I stared out the window, not seeing the scenery, my mind empty and full at the same time. I was Mrs. Mercer now, Victoria Mercer. The name sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else, someone who actually wanted this life. When we arrived back at the mansion, Julian turned to me before we went inside. "I know today was difficult. You don't have to have dinner with me tonight if you'd prefer to be alone." "No," I heard myself say. "No, we should have dinner. We're married now. We should at least try to act like it." Something flickered in his visible eye. Gratitude, maybe. Or just relief that I wasn't going to completely shut him out. That evening, dinner was served in what Julian called the small dining room, though it was still bigger than my family's entire apartment. The table could have seated 12 easily, but place settings had been arranged at one end, much closer together than before. Someone's attempt at intimacy in a house designed for distance. "Tell me about yourself," Julian said once the first course had been served by staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. "What did you do before all this? What did you love?" "I worked at a bookstore. Northside Books downtown." The words came out flat, emotionless. "I spent most of my time reading instead of actually helping customers. Mr. Patterson, my boss, Used to joke that he was paying me to pursue my education. What kind of books? Everything. Classics mostly. Austen, the Brontes, Dickens. I loved anything from the 19th century. But I read contemporary fiction too. Thrillers, mysteries, whatever caught my attention. For the first time since I'd met him, Julian smiled. A real smile, not the tight grimace he usually wore. We have an extensive library here. Thousands of books, many I've never even opened. Take any you want. And perhaps sometimes you'd be willing to read aloud to me. My vision has deteriorated since the stroke. Words blur together after an hour or so. I can do that, I said quietly. At least it would give me something to do, some purpose beyond sitting in my beautiful room feeling like an expensive ornament. The days that followed established a pattern. Breakfast together at 8 o'clock, usually silent except for requests to pass the salt or comments about the weather. I'd spend the morning in the library, losing myself in books that let me forget where I was and why. Lunch alone in my room. Afternoons walking the grounds or reading in the garden gazebo. Dinner with Julian at 7 o'clock, slightly less awkward than breakfast, with stilted conversation about inconsequential things. He never pushed me, never demanded more than I was willing to give. He was unfailingly polite, respectful of my space and my obvious discomfort, and somehow that made it worse. I could have hated him if he'd been cruel or demanding, but he wasn't. He was just desperately, achingly lonely, and his loneliness made me feel guilty for resenting him. On the fourth evening after the wedding, something changed. We were having dinner, pushing food around our plates in our usual uncomfortable silence, when Julian suddenly spoke. "You're miserable here." It wasn't a question. I put down my fork and looked at him. At the half of his face I could see, at the weariness in his visible eye. "What did you expect? That I'd be happy. I hoped you'd adjust. In time. That you'd find some peace here, some comfort. Adjust to being bought." The bitterness I'd been swallowing for days erupted like a volcano. Adjust to selling myself? To giving up everything I wanted because my family was desperate? What part of that am I supposed to find comfortable? You didn't sell yourself. His voice was sharp, the first time I'd heard real emotion from him. You made a sacrifice to save your family. There's a difference, Victoria. A profound difference. Is there? I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Because from where I'm sitting, it feels exactly the same. I'm here because you paid for me. You own my time, my presence, my company. That's the definition of being bought. His visible eye followed me as I moved toward the door, blazing with something that might have been anger or pain or both. Victoria, I know you think I'm a monster. Maybe I am. Maybe what I did was unforgivable. But if there had been any other way. He stopped, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate. I know it doesn't change anything. But it's true. I'm sorry you're trapped here. I'm sorry your choices were so terrible that this seemed like the best option. I'm sorry for all of it. I left without responding, practically running down the hallway to the stairs, taking them two at a time until I reached my room and could finally close the door and lean against it and breathe. In the corridor outside Julian's quarters, I nearly collided with Gregory Stone. The assistant was coming from the direction of Julian's rooms, and his usually impassive face showed something like concern. How is he? Gregory asked, his voice low. Fine. Tired. He's tired. He pushes himself too hard. Gregory's eyes narrowed slightly, studying me in a way that made me uncomfortable. You know why he wears the mask constantly, don't you? Not just at dinner, but all the time. He said the stroke paralyzed his face, that the left side droops and it disturbs people. Yes. Gregory nodded slowly. Yes, that's the reason. The paralysis is quite severe. Difficult to look at. Something in his tone made me pause, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Is there another reason? No. Of course not. But he looked away as he said it, breaking eye contact just long enough that I knew he was lying. I should go check on him. Good night, Mrs. Mercer. I watched him walk away, unease settling in my stomach like a stone. What was he hiding? What was Julian hiding? But I was too tired, too emotionally wrung out to pursue it. I went to my room and collapsed on the bed and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally pulled me under. The following days were slightly better. Not good, but better. Julian, and I fell into a more comfortable routine. He started asking me to read to him in the evenings, and I found I didn't mind. There was something intimate about it, sitting in his study while he listened with his eyes closed. The mask still in place, but his posture relaxed in a way it never was otherwise. We read Austen first. Pride and Prejudice, at his request. I've never actually read it, he admitted. Watched the movie adaptations, but never the book. I'd like to know what I've been missing. So I read to him about Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, about pride and prejudice and misunderstandings and love that grew slowly from antagonism. And sometimes I'd look up from the pages and see Julian watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. A week after the wedding, Martha knocked on my door with a message. Mr. Mercer requests your presence for dinner in his private quarters tonight. He asked me to tell you it's at 8 o'clock. My heart started hammering. His private quarters. This was it then. The part I'd been dreading, the part I'd managed to avoid by keeping my distance. Tell him I'll be there, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I spent the next 2 hours in a state of barely controlled panic. I changed my dress 3 times. Unable to decide what you wore to your wedding night when it came a week late, and you didn't want it to happen at all. Finally, I settled on a simple navy dress, modest and unrevealing, armor disguised as clothing. At precisely 8 o'clock, I knocked on the heavy oak door of Julian's quarters. My hands were shaking. Come in. His voice called out, muffled through the wood. I opened the door expecting. I don't know what I was expecting. A bedroom, probably. A bed. The inevitable conclusion of a marriage, wanted or not. What I found instead surprised me. The room was modest by mansion standards. A large bed, yes, but also bookshelves and comfortable chairs and a fireplace where a fire crackled. A small table had been set for 2 with candles and wine and covered dishes that smelled incredible. Julian stood by the fireplace, still wearing the mask, watching me with his visible eye. I know what you're thinking, he said before I could speak, before I could voice the fear that had been building all day. But I asked you here just to talk, to have dinner, nothing more. I understand this situation is difficult for you. I won't make it worse by expecting anything you're not ready to give. I may have bought your time, Victoria, but I can't buy your willingness. That has to be freely given. The relief was so intense I had to steady myself against the doorframe. Then why here? Why not the dining room like usual? Because I wanted to talk to you without the staff hovering, without Gregory listening at doors, without the formality of that enormous dining room that makes every conversation feel like a business meeting. He gestured to the table. Please, sit. The food will get cold. I sat, though my body was still tense, still ready to run. Julian moved to his chair with difficulty, the cane taking most of his weight, his left leg dragging. He poured wine with his right hand, the left hanging useless at his side. I want to establish the rules of our arrangement, he said once we'd both been served. Clear boundaries, so you know exactly what I expect and what I don't. You're free to do whatever you want. See friends whenever you wish. Travel if you'd like. Spend money however you see fit. I'll have accounts set up in your name tomorrow. I won't control you or monitor you or treat you like property. Then what do you want from me? I asked quietly. If you don't want a real wife, if you don't want intimacy or control, what's the point of any of this? He was silent for a long moment, staring into his wine glass as if it held answers. Because I can't face death alone, Victoria. I know that sounds pathetic. I know it makes me weak. But you can't imagine how terrifying it is. Knowing the end is coming. Knowing you'll face it in an empty house with only paid staff who'll forget you the moment you're gone. I just want someone here who acknowledges I exist. Someone I can talk to who isn't on my payroll. Someone who'll remember me when I'm gone. There was such raw pain in his voice that something cracked in my carefully maintained walls. This wasn't a monster. This wasn't some evil rich man buying a toy. This was a man facing death and desperately trying to hold onto some shred of humanity before the darkness closed in. Tell me about yourself, I said, surprising myself with the request. Your real self. Not the public persona. Not the mansion and the money. Who are you actually? Julian looked at me with something like surprise, then set down his wine glass. That's a longer story than you might want to hear. We have time. You said yourself that's what you bought. My time. He flinched slightly at the reminder, but nodded. I was born poor. My father was in and out of jail for petty crimes. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep my brother Silas and me fed. We grew up in government housing, wore secondhand clothes, learned early that if you wanted something in life you had to fight for it because nobody was going to hand you anything. He paused, lost in memory. I got a scholarship to state college. Studied business. Worked night shifts at a gas station to cover expenses the scholarship didn't. Graduated top of my class. Got into real estate during the market boom in the 80s, when everyone was buying and selling and money was flowing like water. I took massive risks, borrowed everything I could, bought properties everyone said were worthless and flipped them for profit. And it worked. It worked spectacularly. Within 5 years I was wealthy. Within 10 years I was very wealthy. By the time I was 40 I owned more property than I could keep track of, had investments in businesses across 3 states, had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. His voice turned bitter. And I was alone. Utterly, completely alone. You said you were married. That you had a daughter. His whole body tensed at the mention. Yes, Caroline. I met her when I was 35. She was beautiful, sophisticated from old money. Everything I wasn't. I thought I'd made it, you know? Poor boy marries the elegant socialite. Fairy tale ending. We got married 6 months after we met, had a daughter a year later. Lily. He fell silent for so long I thought he might not continue. When he finally spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. I was a terrible husband and worse father. Always working, always traveling, always chasing the next deal. I thought I was providing for them. Thought I was being a good husband by making sure they had everything they could possibly want. The biggest house, the finest clothes, expensive vacations. I gave them everything except what they actually needed. Which was you, I said softly. Which was me. My presence. My attention. My time. The very things I was too busy acquiring wealth to give. He clenched his working hand into a fist. Caroline felt neglected. She met someone else, my business partner of all people. A man I'd trusted. They had an affair behind my back for over a year before I found out. How did you find out? Lily told me. My 13-year-old daughter, trying to protect me, told me that Mommy had a friend who came over when Daddy was traveling. She didn't understand what she was revealing. Pain twisted his visible features. I confronted Caroline. We fought. Screamed at each other things that could never be unsaid. She took Lily and left. Moved in with him. And your daughter? Caroline poisoned her against me. Told her I'd been a terrible husband, that I'd abandoned them for my work, that I didn't really love them. And the worst part is, Victoria, it was all true. Every word. I had been terrible. I had abandoned them. And Lily believed it. She stopped taking my calls. Refused to see me. Told me through lawyers that she never wanted to speak to me again. Julian's voice broke completely. She was 15 when she said that. 15 years old, and she hated me. And I thought I'd have time to fix it. Thought eventually she'd grow up, understand that life was complicated, that I'd made mistakes but loved her anyway. I thought I'd have time to make it right. But you didn't. 3 years later, there was an accident. Caroline, her new husband, and Lily were driving back from some weekend trip. A drunk driver crossed the median. Hit them head-on. All 3 died instantly. Lily was 16 years old. She died hating me. Died thinking I didn't care about her. And I never got the chance to tell her I was sorry. Never got the chance to try to fix what I'd broken. He was crying now, tears streaming down the visible half of his face, and I felt my own eyes burning. This wasn't the story I'd expected. This wasn't the cold, calculating rich man I'd imagined. This was a father living in the hell of knowing he'd destroyed his relationship with his daughter, and she'd died before he could repair it. After that, I shut everyone out, Julian continued, his voice raw. I threw myself into work even harder, like if I just made enough money, built enough buildings, accumulated enough wealth, it would somehow fill the void. I built this mansion thinking maybe someday I'd remarry, have more children, create the family I'd lost. Pathetic, right? As if wealth could replace what I'd destroyed through my own negligence. It's not pathetic, I said quietly. It's human. You made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But you recognized them. You wanted to do better. But I never got the chance. And then 5 years ago, the stroke hit. Massive cerebral infarction, the doctors said. Too much stress, too much work, too much everything. I woke up in a hospital unable to move my left side, unable to speak clearly, half my face paralyzed. The doctors gave me maybe 2 years. Said my heart was damaged, my organs were failing, that it was only a matter of time. He looked at me directly, his visible eye intense and desperate. That's when I realized I was going to die completely alone. No family. No friends who weren't on my payroll. No one who'd remember me except as a name on buildings. And the thought of facing death like that, of just disappearing into nothing with nobody caring, was more terrifying than the dying itself. So you decided to buy a wife. So I decided to make one last attempt at not dying alone. Yes, he didn't flinch from the accusation. I know how it sounds. I know what it makes me. But Vincent Blackwood mentioned your family's situation, mentioned that you were beautiful and intelligent and desperate enough to consider unusual arrangements. And I thought maybe we could help each other. I could save your mother, clear your father's debt, give you financial security for life. And you could give me company for whatever time I have left. We sat in silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the soft ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. I looked at this broken man, this dying man who'd lost everything that mattered and was trying desperately to hold on to some small piece of human connection before the end. The room I chose, I said suddenly, the thought just occurring to me. The corner bedroom on the 3rd floor. Martha mentioned someone lived there before. Was it Lily's room? Julian flinched violently, as if I'd struck him. How did you? Gregory almost mentioned it the first day. He stopped himself. And some of the furniture looked like it might have belonged to a teenager once. That's her room, isn't it? Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. I furnished it when she was 12, before Caroline left. Bought everything she might have wanted, prepared it for her visits. I thought maybe if I gave her a beautiful space here, she'd want to come see me. She never did. Not once. After she died, I had the room sealed. No one entered it for 7 years. Should I choose a different room? No. The force of his response startled both of us. He took a breath, steadying himself. No. Please don't. Let there be life in that room again. Let it not stand as an empty monument to my failures. Let it be something good for once. I felt tears tracking down my own face now, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe because his grief was so raw, so present even years later. Maybe because I understood something about impossible choices and living with regret. Maybe because despite everything, despite the transaction and the money and the awkwardness, I was starting to see Julian Mercer as something other than the rich man who'd bought me. I was starting to see him as just a person, broken and lonely and desperate, yes, but human. Thank you for telling me, I said quietly. I mean that. Thank you for trusting me with this. You deserve to know. To understand what kind of man you've tied yourself to. He attempted a smile that didn't quite work. For better or worse, you're stuck with me for now. We finished dinner, and the conversation turned to lighter things. Books we'd loved. Movies we'd seen. The kind of small talk that fills spaces between strangers trying to become something else. When I left his quarters around midnight, something had shifted between us. Not love. It was far too soon for that. Might never be that. But understanding, maybe. A fragile beginning of something that might eventually become companionship. The following weeks established a new rhythm. Breakfast together became easier, with actual conversation replacing awkward silence. I spent my mornings in the library, but Julian started joining me there, sitting in his chair by the window while I read aloud. We went through Austen's entire collection, then moved on to the Brontes. He had opinions on the books that surprised me with their insight. Jane Eyre is really about power, he said one afternoon after I'd finished a particularly dramatic chapter. Jane refuses to be Rochester's mistress because she understands that accepting would make her powerless. It's only when they meet as equals, when he's been humbled and she's gained independence, that they can actually be together. I never thought of it that way, because society teaches us to see it as a romance. But Bronte was writing about something more fundamental, about how relationships fail when there's an imbalance of power, when one person has everything and the other has nothing. He looked at me meaningfully. Sound familiar? I felt my cheeks heat. Are you saying we're Jane and Rochester? I'm saying I understand why you resent me. Why you feel powerless here. I have all the money, all the control. You're dependent on me for everything. That's not a foundation for anything real. Then what do we do about it? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe we just acknowledge it and try to find our way forward anyway. My mother's treatment was progressing remarkably well. The doctors Julian had hired were the best in the country, and they'd developed an aggressive treatment plan that was actually working. Mom's cancer markers were dropping. She was gaining weight, getting stronger. 3 weeks after my wedding, I visited her at the specialized clinic where she was staying during treatment. Look at you, she said, her eyes bright in a way they hadn't been in months. My daughter, the lady of the manor. How is married life? I sat in the chair beside her bed, taking her hand. It felt less skeletal than before, less like bird bones. It's strange, Mom. He's not who I expected. He's not the monster I imagined. Do you love him? The question caught me off guard. No. I don't know. It's not love in any traditional sense. But I'm not indifferent to what happens to him. When he's in pain, I feel it. When he tells me about his daughter, about losing her, my heart breaks for him. Is that love? Or just sympathy? Mom squeezed my hand. Love comes in many forms, sweetheart. It doesn't always start with passion or romance. Sometimes it grows slowly, from care and understanding and spending time together. Maybe what you're feeling is the beginning of something real. Maybe not. But don't dismiss it just because it doesn't look like what you imagined love would be. I thought about her words all the way back to the estate. Was she right? Was I falling in love with Julian without realizing it? Or was I just confusing gratitude and pity for actual affection? When I got home, and when had I started thinking of the mansion as home, Gregory was waiting in the entrance hall with a strange expression on his face. Mrs. Mercer, you have a visitor. He's waiting in the small sitting room. Who? He says he's Mr. Mercer's brother. Silas Mercer. My stomach dropped. Julian had mentioned his brother exactly once, saying only that they weren't on speaking terms, and he preferred it that way. Does Julian know he's here? I informed him. He said to let him in, that Silas wouldn't leave otherwise. I found Silas Mercer in the sitting room, and the family resemblance was immediate and disturbing. He had the same pale blue eyes as Julian, the same bone structure. But where Julian's face showed pain and loss, Silas's showed nothing but calculating hunger. He was maybe 5 years younger than Julian, fit and handsome in an artificial way, wearing expensive clothes that screamed new money and insecurity. You must be the new wife, he said, looking me up and down in a way that made my skin crawl. His gaze lingered too long, assessed too openly. Well, I have to hand it to my brother. He always did have excellent taste. Even dying, he manages to land a beautiful young thing. Mr. Mercer. I kept my voice cold, professional. Your brother didn't mention you were visiting. That's because he didn't know. Silas grinned, showing too many teeth. I wanted to surprise him. I heard he'd gotten married, bought himself a young bride, and I thought I had to come congratulate him personally. Where is the old invalid, anyway? He's in the library, but he's not feeling well today. Maybe this isn't the best time. Oh, I won't be long. Just want to have a little chat with my baby brother. Family business, you understand. He stood and walked past me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, cloying and expensive. Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm sure Julian's told you all about me. All good things, I'm sure. The sarcasm in his voice made my skin prickle. I followed him to the library, some instinct telling me that Julian shouldn't face this man alone. Julian was sitting in his usual chair by the window. When he saw Silas, his entire body went rigid. The mask couldn't hide the tension in his jaw, the way his working hand clenched on the armrest. Silas, what brings you here? Can a brother visit? Silas dropped uninvited into a chair across from Julian, sprawling like he owned the place. Especially when I hear you've suddenly gotten married to a girl young enough to be your granddaughter. Bought yourself a pretty nurse, did you? Someone to change your bedpan and pretend to care. Watch your mouth, Julian said quietly, and there was steel under the words. Or what? You'll get up and fight me. Silas laughed, cruel and sharp. Face it, Jules. You're falling apart. Body's giving up piece by piece. And here you are playing house with a girl who's clearly in it for the money. It would be sad if it wasn't so pathetic. I stepped forward, anger overriding my usual caution. I think you should leave. Silas turned to look at me, his smile widening. Oh, she's got spirit. I like that. Tell me, sweetheart, how much is my brother paying you? Because I might be able to offer you a better deal once he's gone. Get out. Julian's voice was barely controlled. Now. Not until I ask you one simple question, brother. Silas leaned forward, his eyes glittering with malice. Have you changed your will yet? Or am I still the lucky beneficiary when you finally kick off and stop being such an embarrassment to the family name? The words hit like a bomb. My blood went cold. Julian's jaw tightened so hard I thought something might break. I'm changing it this week. This week. Silas drew out the words mockingly. But you haven't changed it yet, have you? The old will is still in effect. The one you drew up 10 years ago when we were still on speaking terms, before you decided I wasn't good enough for your precious standards. So if something were to happen to you before you get around to changing it, and given your health, that seems increasingly likely, I'd inherit everything. This house, your fortune, all of it. He stood, brushing invisible lint from his expensive jacket. That's interesting, don't you think? Makes a man wonder if maybe he should be patient. Just wait for nature to take its course. Though I hear nature can be helped along, if you know the right people. Are you threatening me? Julian's voice was dangerously quiet. Threatening? Brother, I'm just stating facts. You're dying. We both know it. The question is whether you'll live long enough to change your will in favor of your shiny new trophy wife, or whether I'll finally get what I've always deserved. He walked toward the door, pausing beside me. Word of advice, sweetheart. Make sure he rewrites that will soon. Otherwise, you might find yourself wasting all this time on a dying old man for nothing. He left laughing, and the sound echoed through the mansion like a curse. I slowly entered the library, closing the door behind me. Julian sat with his back to me, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. The mask couldn't hide his defeat. You heard all that? Yes. I walked closer. Is it true? The will is still in his name. Julian sighed heavily and finally turned to face me. His visible eye was wet. Yes. I drew it up years ago when Silas and I were still on decent terms, before I really understood what kind of person he was. After Lily died, I just didn't see the point in changing it. There was no one left to leave anything to, and I figured Silas was blood. Family should inherit, even if we didn't get along. But you promised me. Your assistant promised me I'd inherit everything. And you will. I told Gregory to contact my lawyer the day after you agreed to marry me. I wanted to transfer everything to you immediately. But the lawyer was out of the country, some emergency with his daughter in Europe. He won't be back until day after tomorrow. I was going to tell you, but I was afraid you'd think I was just trying to manipulate you. That money was the only thing I had to offer. I sat down heavily on the ottoman near his chair. My mind was racing. Darius had indeed promised me the inheritance even before the wedding. So Julian really had planned to change the will from the beginning. But what if he didn't make it? What if something happened before the meeting with the lawyer? What are you thinking about? Julian asked softly. I'm thinking Silas might be right, I admitted, the words bitter in my mouth. I agreed to this marriage because of the money. Not for myself, but still because of money. That makes me no better than him. No better than all the people you've known who only wanted you for what you could give them. No. The force in Julian's voice surprised me. You're nothing like him, Victoria. Nothing like any of them. Silas is greedy and entitled and vicious. He's always resented me for being successful when he failed at everything he tried. I helped him countless times, bailed him out of debt, gave him money to start businesses that all collapsed. He wanted what I had but didn't want to work for it. And now he's waiting for me to die like a vulture circling a carcass. But I'm still here for money. You're here for your mother, for your family. There's a difference, Victoria. A profound difference. Silas wants my fortune because he thinks he deserves it, because he's envious of what I built. You made a sacrifice to save someone you love. Don't let him twist that into something ugly. I looked at Julian's ravaged face, at the pain and sadness etched into every line, and felt something shift inside me. When had I stopped seeing him as the man who'd bought me and started seeing him as just Julian? when had his well-being started mattering to me for reasons that had nothing to do with money or obligation. He said you were dying, I said quietly, that your organs are failing. Is that true? Julian was silent for a long moment. The doctors say my heart is weak. The stroke did more damage than they initially thought. I could have another year, or I could have another week. There's no way to know. Then we need to get that will change immediately. Tomorrow if possible. Why? He looked at me intently. Why does it matter to you, Victoria? You said yourself you didn't want the inheritance. Because I don't want Silas to win, I said fiercely. Because you're a good man who made mistakes but tried to make up for them. And your brother is a parasite who's done nothing but feed off your success. Because you deserve to decide where your fortune goes, not have it stolen by someone who doesn't care if you live or die. And because I realized with a start, I cared what happened to Julian. Genuinely cared. Somewhere in the past few weeks, he'd stopped being the transaction and started being a person I actually gave a damn about. Julian reached out and took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his condition. Thank you, he whispered, for caring, for not walking away. I don't deserve your loyalty, but I'm grateful for it. That evening, Gregory knocked on my door while I was getting ready for bed. His face was troubled in a way I'd never seen before. Mrs. Mercer, I need to speak with you. It's important. What's wrong? Is Julian okay? For now, yes. But I overheard something tonight that disturbs me. He glanced down the hallway as if checking for eavesdroppers. Mr. Silas stayed on the grounds after his visit. He's meeting with someone in the gardens. I saw them from my window, and I heard part of their conversation. My stomach tightened. What did they say? They were talking about Mr. Mercer's health, about how the stroke has weakened him, about how unfortunate it would be if he had another episode before the will could be changed. Gregory's voice dropped. Mrs. Mercer, I think Silas is planning something. I think he's going to try to ensure his brother doesn't make it to that lawyer's appointment. We need to call the police. And tell them what? That we overheard a vague conversation? That we suspect something might happen? They'd laugh us out of the station. We have no proof, just suspicions. He ran a hand through his hair. But I wanted you to know. To be watchful. Don't leave Mr. Mercer alone, especially at night. I'll increase security, but quietly. If Silas suspects we're onto him, he might act faster. After Gregory left, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Silas's threats, about the will that hadn't been changed yet, about Julian dying alone in his room while someone who wanted him dead had access to the property. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep. I pulled on a robe and went downstairs, intending to check on Julian to make sure he was okay. The mansion was dark except for small lights along the baseboards, creating pools of shadow everywhere. My footsteps echoed on the marble floors. I was halfway to Julian's wing when I heard something. A crash, then a cry of pain that made my blood run cold. I ran. Julian's door was closed but not locked. I burst through to find him on the floor beside his bed, curled on his side, his cane just out of reach. The mask had slipped sideways, revealing part of the paralyzed left side of his face. Julian. I rushed to him, dropping to my knees. What happened? Fell, he managed through gritted teeth. Tried to get to the bathroom. Leg gave out. Can't get up. Don't move. Just stay still. I grabbed the phone from his nightstand and dialed Gregory's extension. He answered on the third ring, voice groggy. Get here immediately and call Dr. Harrison. Mr. Mercer has fallen. I hung up before he could respond and turned back to Julian. He was breathing hard, pain etched across his face. The mask was dangling from its cord, leaving him completely exposed. The left side of his face drooped severely, the eye half closed, the corner of his mouth frozen. But even through the paralysis, I could see fear. Don't look, he whispered. Please don't look at me like this. Stop. I carefully adjusted his position, trying to make him more comfortable without moving him too much. You think I care about what you look like right now? You're hurt. That's all that matters. Gregory arrived within minutes, followed shortly by Dr. Harrison, a distinguished older man who'd been Julian's physician for years. They examined him carefully while I stood back, chewing my thumbnail, watching every movement. Severe sprain of the ankle, Dr. Harrison announced finally. Possible hairline fracture. We'll need x-rays to be sure. Heavy bruising on the hip and shoulder. Nothing life-threatening, but he'll need to be on strict bed rest for at least a week. No walking, minimal movement. I can manage. Julian started to protest, but the doctor cut him off. Mr. Mercer, in your condition, any fall could be catastrophic. You cannot be alone. You need constant supervision, someone with you at all times. He looked at me. Mrs. Mercer, I understand this is asking a lot, but your husband needs care around the clock for the next several days. I'll do it, I heard myself say. I'll stay with him. Both Julian and Gregory stared at me. Julian's visible eye was wide with shock. Victoria, you don't have to. I'm your wife. The words came out firmly, surprising even myself. Officially, legally, your wife. And wives take care of their husbands when they're sick. So don't argue with me. Dr. Harrison nodded approvingly and began giving instructions. Medications to manage pain and prevent blood clots. Ice and elevation for the ankle. Signs to watch for that might indicate something more serious. I listened intently, memorizing every detail. When the doctor and Gregory finally left, Julian and I were alone. I helped him settle back into bed, propped pillows under his injured leg, brought him water and his medication. Why are you doing this? He asked as I arranged the blankets over him. We both know this isn't a real marriage. You don't owe me this level of care. I sat on the edge of the bed, meeting his gaze. Maybe it wasn't real at the beginning, but you helped my family when no one else would. You gave my mother a chance to live. I can't just stand by when you're in pain and need help. There's more to it than that. His eyes searched my face. Isn't there? I didn't answer directly. Tell me about Lily. About who she was, not just what happened to her. Julian looked surprised by the change of subject, but after a moment he began to talk. He told me about a little girl with pigtails who loved to read, who wanted to be a doctor so she could help people, whose laugh sounded like wind chimes. He told me about bedtime stories and scraped knees, and the way she'd hold his hand when they crossed streets. He spoke and tears streamed down his face, both the visible side and the paralyzed side where they tracked different paths. I held his working hand and listened, and something inside me cracked open. I realized I wasn't staying with Julian out of obligation or gratitude. I was staying because somewhere along the way, I'd started to care about him. Really care, in a way that had nothing to do with money or contracts or saving my mother. Over the next week, I barely left Julian's side. I helped him with everything. Eating, moving, the deeply personal tasks that should have been humiliating, but somehow weren't. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told me about his first business deal, his greatest failures, his deepest regrets. I told him about growing up poor, about dreams I'd given up, about the future I'd imagined before everything changed. What did you want to be? He asked one afternoon while I was reading to him. Before all this, what were you working toward? I wanted to teach, I admitted. Literature, maybe at a community college. I loved books, loved the way stories could transport you somewhere else, make you feel less alone. I wanted to share that with other people. You could still do that. Go to school. Get your degree. I'd pay for everything, and it would give you something that's yours. Maybe someday. I closed the book. Right now, this is enough. His visible eye studied me. You've changed since we got married. You're less angry, less resentful. Why? Because you're not who I thought you were, I said honestly. I thought you were a rich man buying a toy. But you're just a person who's scared and lonely and trying not to disappear. I understand that now. And what about you? Are you still here just because of the money? I thought about that question for a long time. At first, yes. But now I'm here because when you're in pain, I feel it. When you tell me about Lily, my heart breaks for you. When I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is whether you slept well, whether you're feeling better. Is that just obligation? Or is it something else? Julian reached up and touched my face with his working hand. The gesture so tender it made my throat tight. I think it might be something else, Victoria. For both of us. But that fragile beginning was about to be tested. Martha, the housekeeper, came to me 3 days after Julian's fall. Her face was pale, her usual composure shaken. Mrs. Mercer, I need to speak with you privately. It's urgent. We went to my sitting room, and she closed the door carefully before speaking. I overheard Mr. Stone Gregory on the phone this morning. He was in the kitchen, thought no one was around. He was talking to someone about Mr. Mercer's condition, about the fall, about how weak he is now. That's his job. He helps manage Julian's care. That's not all. The person on the other end asked when it might happen, when the end might come. And Mr. Stone said soon, very soon, especially now that he's bedridden. Nature just needs a little help. Mrs. Mercer, I think Gregory is working with someone. I think they're planning to hurt Mr. Mercer. Ice flooded my veins. Gregory, Julian's assistant for 20 years. The man he trusted more than anyone. Are you certain? I know what I heard. And there's more. Martha pulled a small bottle from her apron pocket. I found this in Mr. Stone's bathroom when I was cleaning. It's digoxin, a heart medication. But Mr. Mercer isn't prescribed digoxin. I checked with Dr. Harrison. What does digoxin do? In proper doses, it treats heart failure. But too much. It causes heart attacks. Especially in someone with Mr. Mercer's weakened condition. It would look completely natural, like his heart just gave out. My hands started shaking. We need to tell Julian. We need to call the police. And say what? That we found medication that could be for anything? That we overheard a phone conversation that could have been about anything? We need proof, Mrs. Mercer. Real evidence. Otherwise, it's just accusations against a man who's been with Mr. Mercer for 2 decades. Then what do? We watch. We wait. And we don't leave Mr. Mercer alone for a second. Especially not with Mr. Stone. From that moment, I became hypervigilant. I stayed with Julian constantly, even sleeping in the chair beside his bed. When Gregory tried to send me away for various reasons, documents to sign, calls to make, rest I supposedly needed, I refused. I saw his frustration growing, saw the irritated glances he threw my way. 2 days later, Julian received a call from his lawyer. He could come to the estate the next day to handle the will. Everything was finally falling into place. That night, I was reading to Julian when Gregory appeared in the doorway with a tea tray. I thought Mr. Mercer might like his evening tea, he said pleasantly. Help him sleep better after the day's pain. I'll take it. I stood up, moving between Gregory and Julian's bed. You can leave it on the table. I can stay and help him drink it. You've been here all day, Mrs. Mercer. You should rest. I'm fine. Thank you, Gregory. For just a second, his mask slipped. I saw frustration flash across his face, quickly suppressed. Of course. Good night, then. After he left, I stared at the tea for a long moment. Then I poured it down the bathroom sink and made Julian fresh tea myself, using the kettle in his room. You think he would poison me? Julian said quietly. It wasn't a question. I think someone wants you dead before you can change your will. And I'm not taking any chances. Gregory has been with me for 20 years. And Silas is your brother. Blood doesn't make people loyal, Julian. Fear and greed make people do terrible things. He was quiet, processing. What do? We wait until tomorrow. The lawyer comes, you change the will, and then we go to the police with our suspicions. Once you're no longer valuable to Silas, Gregory loses his motivation. It seemed like a solid plan. It should have worked. But around 3 a.m., everything went wrong. I woke to the sound of Julian gasping. He was sitting up in bed, clutching his chest, his face contorted in agony. Can't breathe. Victoria, I can't. I lunged for the phone, dialing emergency services with shaking fingers. I need an ambulance immediately. My husband is having a heart attack. I gave the address, hung up, turned back to Julian. He'd collapsed sideways, his lips turning blue. I started CPR, something I'd learned in a high school health class, and prayed I remembered correctly. The door burst open. Gregory stood there, and for just a second, just a flicker, I saw satisfaction on his face. Then concern slammed into place like a mask. What happened? Call Dr. Harrison. Now. The next 30 minutes were chaos. The ambulance arrived, EMTs swarmed. Julian was loaded onto a stretcher. Dr. Harrison met us at the hospital, grim-faced. It's a cardiac event, possibly a heart attack. We're running tests now. I sat in the waiting room, covered in Julian's sweat, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline. Gregory sat across from me, looking appropriately worried. "I need to use the restroom," he said, standing. "Will you be okay for a few minutes?" "Fine." As soon as he left, I grabbed my phone. Called Martha. "Check his room. His bathroom. Look for that bottle of digoxin. If it's gone, we know he used it." She called back 10 minutes later. "It's gone, Mrs. Mercer. The bottle's completely gone." I hung up and saw Gregory returning. In that moment, I knew. He'd done this. Given Julian something that triggered the heart attack. He'd tried to kill my husband. Dr. Harrison emerged 2 hours later. "He's stable. It was a severe cardiac episode, but we've managed to stabilize his heart rhythm. He's weak but conscious. He's asking for you." I found Julian in a private room, hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily. His visible eye found me immediately. "You saved my life," he whispered. "Not yet, but I'm going to." I leaned close, keeping my voice low. "Gregory did this. I'm sure of it. Martha found digoxin in his bathroom before, and now it's gone. He poisoned you, Julian. He tried to kill you. We need proof. I'm going to get it. But first, you need to recover. Can you hold on? Can you survive long enough for the lawyer to come? For you, I'll survive anything." The next morning, Julian was transferred back to the estate with round-the-clock medical supervision. The lawyer came that afternoon, and Julian signed the new will with Dr. Harrison and Martha as witnesses. Everything went to me, but we still needed proof of Gregory's betrayal. It came 3 days later, when I was in Julian's room helping him eat lunch. There was a knock on the door, and Gregory entered with a strange expression. "Mrs. Mercer, there's been a discrepancy in one of Mr. Mercer's accounts. A large transfer that he needs to review." He handed Julian a document. I watched Julian's face go white. "What's wrong?" Julian's hand shook as he passed me the paper. It was a bank statement showing a transfer of $500,000 from Julian's account to an offshore account. 3 days ago. The signature was Julian's. "I didn't authorize this," Julian whispered. "I never saw this document. I never signed it." I looked at the signature carefully. It was close, very close. But the final letter was wrong. Julian always made a specific flourish. This one didn't have it. "It's a forgery," I said. "Someone forged your signature and stole $500,000. Gregory stood in the doorway, and I saw the moment he realized we'd figured it out. His hand moved to his jacket. "How unfortunate that you noticed," he said coldly, pulling out a gun. "I was hoping to complete the transfer and be gone before anyone checked the accounts. But it seems we're out of time." I stepped in front of Julian instinctively, my heart hammering. "Gregory, what are you doing?" "What I should have done weeks ago." His voice was cold, emotionless. 20 years. 20 years I've been his servant. 20 years of yes, Mr. Mercer. And right away, Mr. Mercer, while he barely acknowledged I existed. I was invisible. A tool. A function. Not a person. "I trusted you." Julian's voice cracked with pain worse than any physical injury. "You used me, and Silas offered me real money. A percentage of everything he inherits. All I had to do was help nature along. The digoxin should have worked. Would have worked if she hadn't been watching you constantly." He aimed the gun at Julian. "But this will be faster." An intruder broke in. "Tragic. You tried to defend your husband and got caught in the crossfire. Everything happened at once." Gregory's finger tightened on the trigger. I tensed to throw myself at him, knowing I wouldn't be fast enough. And then the door behind Gregory exploded inward. Martha swung a heavy iron candlestick into the back of Gregory's skull with all her strength. The gun went off, the bullet going wild, embedding in the wall beside the window. Gregory crumpled to the floor. "I heard everything," Martha said, breathing hard. "I've been listening at doors for 3 days, waiting for him to incriminate himself. And I called the police the moment he pulled out that gun. They're on their way." I collapsed beside Julian's bed, shaking uncontrollably. He reached out and pulled me close, his working arm surprisingly strong. "You're safe," he whispered. "We're both safe." The police arrived within minutes. Gregory was arrested, his phone confiscated. The evidence they found was damning. Months of text messages with Silas, planning Julian's death. Emails about the forged bank transfers. Records of purchasing digoxin from an unlicensed online pharmacy. Photos of the mansion, marked with potential entry points. Silas was arrested an hour later at his apartment, screaming about his rights and demanding his lawyer. It was over. Finally, it was over. But the biggest surprise came 3 days later. Dr. Harrison called with news that changed everything. "Mr. Mercer, I've been analyzing your recent blood work, particularly the samples from your hospital stay. I found elevated levels of digoxin in your system, as we suspected. But I also found traces of other medications. Anticoagulants that were never prescribed. Beta blockers in doses far higher than recommended." Julian went still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that someone has been slowly poisoning you for months. Maybe longer. The weakness, the increasing paralysis, the rapid decline. Some of that was the stroke, yes. But much of it was artificially induced. Your body has been fighting a chemical assault." "How long?" "I'd need to run more tests to be certain, but based on the concentration levels, I'd estimate 6 to 8 months. 6 to 8 months. Which meant Gregory had started poisoning Julian almost immediately after he and Silas had begun their conspiracy. "What happens now?" I asked. "If we stop the poisoning, we give his body time to clear the toxins. We support his natural healing. And we see what he's actually capable of recovering." Dr. Harrison smiled. "Mr. Mercer, your prognosis was based on symptoms that were partially manufactured. Without the poisoning, your heart should stabilize. Your paralysis might not reverse completely, but it should improve significantly. You're not dying nearly as fast as we thought." Julian looked at me with his visible eye wide. "I might actually have time." "You might actually have time," the doctor confirmed. "Years, potentially. Not the 1 or 2 we estimated." Over the following weeks, Julian's improvement was remarkable. The tremors decreased. His left hand regained some movement. He started walking with just a cane again, no assistance needed. The paralysis in his face didn't vanish, but it softened enough that he stopped wearing the mask entirely. I saw his real face for the first time on a Tuesday afternoon. He came into the library where I was reading, and the mask was gone. The left side of his face still drooped slightly. The eye didn't open as wide as the right, but it wasn't the horror he'd believed it to be. It was just his face. Different, marked by trauma, but undeniably human. "You're not wearing it," I said softly. "I realized something. You've seen me at my absolute worst, crying in pain, helpless. And you stayed. You cared for me. You saved my life. If you can see me like that and not run, then maybe the mask isn't necessary anymore." I stood up and walked to him, reaching up to touch the paralyzed side of his face gently. "I never needed the mask on to see you, Julian. I've been seeing you for a while now." "When did it change?" he asked. "When did this become real for you?" "I don't know exactly. Maybe when you told me about Lily, and I saw how much it still hurt. Maybe when you fell, and I realized how scared I was that something might happen to you. Maybe when I was sitting in that hospital waiting room praying you'd survive." I smiled. "Whenever it was, it happened. You stopped being the transaction and started being Julian." He cupped my face with his working hand. "I love you, Victoria. I don't know when it happened either, but somewhere between the contract and the crisis, I fell completely in love with you." "I love you too," I whispered and realized it was true. Completely, utterly true. "I love you, and not because you saved my mother or because of the will or any of it. I love you because you're kind and broken and real. Because you're you." He kissed me then, properly, deeply, for the first time in our marriage. And it felt like starting over. Like everything that came before had been practice for this moment. 3 months after Gregory and Silas's arrest, we were sitting by a lake on property Julian owned in the mountains. The house we'd designed together was almost complete, simple and beautiful. Nothing like the mansion. A real home, not a monument. "I keep thinking about how close it came," Julian said, holding my hand as we watched the sun set over the water. "If you hadn't stayed with me, if you'd kept your distance, Gregory would have succeeded. I'd be dead and Silas would have everything. But I did stay. And you're alive." "Why did you stay, Victoria?" "Really. The first time, when I fell. You could have let Martha handle it, but you chose to care for me yourself. Because somewhere between the contract and that moment, you'd stopped being the man who bought me and started being someone I couldn't bear to lose." I leaned against his shoulder. "Funny how that works. You think you're entering one kind of story, and it turns into something completely different. Do you regret it? Any of it? I thought about that question seriously. I regret that I had to sell myself in the first place, that we didn't meet some other way. But do I regret where we ended up? No. I found something real in the strangest place. I found love in a transaction. I found you. Julian turned to look at me, his face, both sides of it, open and vulnerable. I was dying when we met. Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. I'd given up on connection, on feeling anything real. And then you came along and reminded me what it means to be human, what it means to be seen and known and loved anyway. We saved each other, I said simply. You saved my mother. I saved your life. And we both saved ourselves from being alone. The house by the lake was completed 2 months later. We moved in together, left the mansion behind with all its ghosts and memories, started fresh in a place without history. My mother's cancer remained in remission. She visited often, she and Julian becoming friends in a way that surprised everyone. My father struggled with guilt for a while, but eventually accepted that I'd made my own choice and was happy with the outcome. Marcus sent me a message months later, apologizing for how we'd ended things. He was dating someone new, someone from his art class. I sent him my well wishes and meant it. Silas and Gregory both went to prison. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, embezzlement, fraud. Gregory got 15 years. Silas got 20. Neither would be eligible for parole for at least a decade. Julian and I had a second wedding on our 1-year anniversary. A real one this time, with our family and a few close friends. I wore a real wedding dress. He didn't wear a mask. We said vows we'd written ourselves, promises that meant something because we actually wanted to make them. I promised to see you, I said, tears streaming down my face. Really see you. Not your money or your past or your mistakes. Just you. I promised to deserve you, he replied, his own eyes wet. To spend every day trying to be worthy of the gift you've given me. To love you not because a contract says I should, but because I choose to, every single day. 6 months after that, Julian started painting again. He set up a studio in one of the empty rooms and spent hours there, learning to use his left hand, creating art from his damage. The paintings were strange and beautiful, abstract expressions of pain and healing and transformation. We talked about adopting, about filling the house with the family he'd always wanted, about giving some child what Lily never got, a father who was present, who chose them every single day. I won't make the same mistakes, he promised. I won't let work consume me. I won't forget what matters. I know. You're different now. We both are. He pulled me close, wrapping both arms around me now that his left side had regained enough strength. They say the people closest to you hold the sharpest knives. But they also hold the strongest shields, I finished. They see you at your worst and love you anyway. They step between you and the bullet. They swing candlesticks at your enemies. They save your life in every way a person can be saved, Julian whispered. Looking back now, I can see the whole journey clearly. How I went into that mansion 3 months ago thinking I was entering a prison, a gilded cage that would trap me for a year. How I planned to endure Julian Mercer, to tolerate him just long enough to secure my mother's future. I never expected to see him, to really see him, past the mask and the money and the loneliness. Never expected to care whether he lived or died. Never expected to fall in love with the broken man who thought buying companionship was his only option. And Julian never expected me to stay. To choose him when I didn't have to anymore. To fight for his life when walking away would have been easier. The contract that brought us together burned in our fireplace months ago, both of us watching the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. We didn't need it anymore. What we had wasn't bound by legal documents or financial agreements. It was built day by day, choice by choice, crisis by crisis. Built from care and understanding and the decision to see each other as more than the roles we'd been forced into. They say you can't buy love. They're right. But sometimes, in the strangest circumstances, love finds you anyway. In a contract that became real. In a mask that hid everything until it hid nothing. In poison that almost killed but somehow made us stronger. My name is Victoria Mercer. I'm 24 years old. And this is the story of how I sold myself and found myself. How I married a dying man who refused to die. How betrayal from the closest person led to salvation from an unexpected one. How love grew in the last place I expected to find it. Julian and I sit on our porch now, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. He's painting his hands, both of them, sure and steady. I'm reading, occasionally looking up to watch him work. We don't talk much. We don't need to. After everything we've been through, the silence between us is comfortable, full, rich with understanding that comes from walking through fire together and emerging on the other side. What are you thinking about? Julian asks without looking up from his canvas. About how none of this was supposed to happen. How I was supposed to endure you for a year, collect my inheritance, and move on with my life. But you didn't. But I didn't. I closed my book and moved to stand behind him, wrapping my arms around his shoulders. I fell in love instead, with a man who thought he was dying, with a person who just needed someone to see him. Julian sets down his brush and turns in his chair to face me. The late afternoon light catches his face, both sides of it, and I see no trace of the broken man I met a year and a half ago. He's healed. We both have. Thank you, he says softly. For what? For staying. For fighting. For seeing past what I paid you to do and choosing to actually care. For saving my life in every way a person can be saved. I kiss him, long and slow and deep. Thank you for needing to be saved. Thank you for giving me a reason to fight. Thank you for showing me that love doesn't always look like what we expect it to. Behind us, the house we built together glows warm in the fading light. Inside are the lives we're creating. Plans for adoption, Julia's studio full of paintings, my bookshelf full of the books I'm finally writing, after discovering I had stories worth telling. The golden cage I feared became a home. The transaction became a marriage. The death sentence became a second chance at life. And the man who tried to buy companionship? He got so much more than he paid for. He got real love. He got a partner. He got someone who'd fight like hell to keep him alive. Just like I got so much more than money could buy. I got understanding. I got someone who saw past my desperation to who I really was. I got a love that grew slowly from ashes. The people closest to you hold the sharpest knives. But they also hold the strongest shields. They save you when you're drowning. They fight your demons. They refuse to let you disappear alone into the dark. That's what real love looks like. Not the fairy tale. Not the romance novel. But the messy, complicated, hard-won truth of two broken people choosing each other every single day. This is our story. Our revenge on everyone who thought we wouldn't make it. On Silas and Gregory who tried to destroy us. On every person who looked at our age gap and our contract and our circumstances and said it would never be real. We proved them all wrong. And we're just getting started.